My name is Daniel Reese. I'm 42 years old, and on March 18, 2025, I died during a wildfire rescue in Northern California. I was a battalion chief with CAL FIRE, based out of Redding. I'd been through dozens of wildfires in my 20-year career, but nothing prepared me for what happened that day near Lassen National Forest. We were responding to a fast-moving blaze that had jumped the containment line. Wind gusts were hitting 70 miles per hour. It wasn't a fire anymore. It was a beast, devouring everything in its path. I remember radioing in a final update. Multiple structures threatened. We're pulling crews back. Visibility 0. Then I saw it, a wall of flame, curling over the ridge like a tidal wave of orange and black. I turned to warn my team, but it was too late. The firestorm hit with a roar like a freight train. Trees exploded. The air turned to smoke and embers. And then, silence. That's when I died. It wasn't how I expected. There was no pain, no fear, just stillness. Then, light. Not firelight. Not headlights. Something else. Something alive. I was standing above the fire line, looking down at the scene, my crew scrambling to reach me, my own body crumpled beside a burned-out dozer. I should have panicked. I should have felt something. But instead, I felt peace. Then the world around me changed. The fire vanished. The smoke cleared. I was standing in a vast open field under a sky unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not blue, not gray, but glowing with a kind of warmth you could feel in your bones. I wasn't alone. Someone stood ahead, at the edge of a small hill. A man, but more than a man. Clothed in radiant white, surrounded by a presence so powerful and tender it stole my breath, even though I wasn't breathing. I knew who it was before he even spoke. "Daniel," he said. My name, spoken like it had always belonged to him. "Jesus," I whispered. Not because someone told me, I just knew. The way a child knows their mother's voice in the dark. He walked toward me, not hurried, just steady. "You have run hard and carried much. But now, I want to show you something." I followed, without hesitation. There was no resistance left in me. We stood at the top of the hill. Below us, the land stretched endlessly, forests, cities, oceans. But something was different. There were patterns in the land. Lines of gold and dark smoke, weaving through everything. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Your world," Jesus replied. "But not as you see it, as it truly is." I watched as golden threads glowed along highways and rivers, people praying in hospitals, crying out in disaster zones, whispering desperate pleas in their bedrooms. Their words rose like sparks, weaving into bright lines that held back waves of darkness. "You see the power of a single cry," he said. "Even whispered through pain, it echoes in eternity." Then he pointed toward a dark area, thick with smoke and confusion. I recognized the region. It was my home, California. The coast, the mountains, the towns. But over it hung a heaviness I couldn't describe. Not physical. Spiritual. "There is a war," he said. "Not of fire or weapons, but of hearts. The enemy is not the blaze. The enemy is fear, division, pride." I wanted to speak, to ask what any of this had to do with me. But I stayed quiet. I could feel something building. "Daniel," he said, turning to me again, "what you fought on Earth was a shadow of what's happening here. The true fire isn't in the forest, it's in the soul." He raised his hand, and the sky shifted. I saw visions, families torn apart not by flame, but by silence. People buried in distraction, chasing comfort while their spirit starved. Churches divided over opinions. Communities growing colder, more afraid. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because you are going back. His words hit me like a backdraft. I wasn't ready for that. I wanted to stay, to rest, to remain in the peace that surrounded him. But he stepped closer. You have something to carry, a truth they've forgotten, a call they've stopped hearing. You will remind them. I didn't know what to say. My whole life, I dealt with disasters, fires, floods, chaos, but nothing prepared me for this, for the responsibility he was placing on me. He smiled, not the kind of smile that ends in lips, a smile that filled the world around me with strength. You won't be alone, Daniel, he said. I'll show you more. And as he spoke, the vision began to shift again. The sky shifted like silk turning in slow motion. Colors I had no names for folded into one another. We were no longer in the open field. Now, we stood on a high peak, a mountain that overlooked everything. But it wasn't made of rock or ice. It was made of memory. From here, I saw moments of my own life rise like echoes across the landscape. My wedding day, the night my son was born, the wildfire in 2017 that nearly took my life. Every choice, every failure, every act of mercy or anger, they were all there, painted across the horizon. This is where I show you what the fire could not touch, Jesus said. I watched as a younger version of myself sat beside a rookie firefighter on his first day, sharing advice. I saw a moment I'd forgotten, pulling a dog out of a smoldering barn, returning it to a child who wouldn't stop thanking me through her tears. But then I saw the other side, me shouting at my wife in frustration, ignoring my son's soccer game because I was too busy reviewing reports, turning away from my aging father's phone calls because I was tired of repeating myself. I wanted to look away. Jesus didn't let me. You thought you were only putting out fires, he said. But your words, your actions, they either lit hope or snuffed it out. I stood there in silence. I had fought flames my whole life, but I hadn't fought the ones in my own heart. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and in an instant, peace washed over me again. Regret is not your identity, he said. Repentance is your doorway. A glowing path appeared beneath our feet. We began walking. The path led us through what felt like time itself. I saw people I'd known, and others I'd never met. Some were old, some young. Some wore uniforms like mine. Others wore aprons, backpacks, suits. But all of them were holding something bright, like a small ember of light. These are the ones who carry the fire of faith, Jesus said. We stopped at one figure, a woman in her 70s kneeling beside her bed. Tears fell as she prayed silently. I couldn't hear her words, but I felt the weight of them. She prays for her grandson, Jesus whispered, every night. And because of her, he will be spared something you cannot yet see. We passed another, a teenage boy sitting alone at a park bench, reading a worn Bible. He has questions, but his heart is open. I will answer him. With every person, I felt a story unfold. Struggles, victories, silent pain, bold faith. They were all different, but all of them were lights pushing back the darkness I'd seen earlier. This, Jesus said, is what holds your world together. Not politics, not power, but prayer. I nodded. It felt like truth carved in stone. But there's more I need to show you, he said. The path brightened. Ahead, the horizon pulsed, and the light called us forward. Before this moment, I never thought much about helicopters. Just tools of the job, loud, mechanical, impersonal. But on March 18th, the chopper we flew into the fire line became my last ride on Earth. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Visibility's dropping. Hold on. We were 7 minutes out from Sector 3, the worst hit zone. My crew was already on the ground, and I was flying in with the second team for evacuation prep. Wind buffeted the bird so hard, I thought the rotors would snap. I looked down through the haze. Trees were falling like matchsticks. Roads were gone, swallowed by flame. It wasn't a forest anymore. It was a battlefield. "Get ready," I shouted over the roar. We hovered just long enough to rope down. The second my boots hit dirt, I knew we were in trouble. The fire had turned. It was racing back at us, fast and unpredictable. I radioed the pilot. "Evac zones compromised. Pull out, we're repositioning." The helicopter lifted off, its blades cutting through ash-thick air. That was the last time I saw it. Minutes later, the ridge behind me exploded in flame. And then I was gone. Now, standing beside Jesus on the path of light, I saw it all replayed. But I wasn't watching fire or helicopters anymore. I was watching hearts. He showed me first responders around the world, paramedics, nurses, volunteers, people who stepped into chaos without guarantee of safety. I saw a firefighter in Greece carrying an old man on his back through smoke. A woman in Brazil shielding children with her own body during a flood. A team in Ukraine pulling strangers from a crumbled building. I looked at Jesus. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because courage," he said, "is sacred. They may never hear my name," he continued, "but when they risk their lives for others, that is love in motion. And love is my language." I felt that truth settle in my chest, but he wasn't done. "You thought dying in fire made you brave," he said gently. "But bravery isn't how you die. It's how you live." Then he turned to me, eyes full of mercy. "And Daniel, you still have time." The ground beneath us pulsed with light, not dangerous, not blinding, but alive. It felt like a summons, like the moment before a storm breaks, or a birth. I looked into his eyes and knew something bigger was coming. We stood on the path of light, the world around us shifting like breath. The horizon ahead wasn't land or sky, it was something else. A veil. And it was thinning. Jesus turned toward me. "Before you return, there is something you must understand." With a single gesture, the world changed again. We were back in the forest, or what was left of it. But this wasn't the real forest. It was like a memory, frozen in time. Trees stood still, suspended mid-collapse. Ash floated in the air but never fell. The fire that had killed me was paused, held in some divine stillness. "This," Jesus said, "is where fear took root." He pointed to a moment, me, crouched behind a burned tree, shouting orders into my radio, heart racing, lungs burning. My voice was strong, but inside I was spiraling. I watched my own face. The anger, the stress, the silence in my spirit. "You fought the fire," he said, "but not the fear behind it." And I saw it then, how I'd used my job to drown the ache inside me. The guilt from not being there when my brother died. The anger I never voiced. The questions I stopped asking God years ago. "You built your strength on ashes," he said, "but I want to give you stone." Then the fire around us began to move again, not violently, but with purpose. And suddenly, out of the burnt ground, I saw small green shoots. New life. Tiny sprouts piercing the destruction. "Do you see it?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Nothing is wasted," he said. "Not even fire." We stood in silence. The forest, once death, was becoming something new. Then he spoke again. "Your world is shaking. It will shake more. Fires, floods, collapse. Not as punishment, but as mercy. To bring people back to the only ground that doesn't burn. Me." I wanted to speak, but my throat locked. Not from fear, from awe. "Daniel," he said gently, The time is coming. And behind him, the veil began to part. A great light spilled through, and I knew this was the edge, the place between the world of the living and everything beyond. I stepped forward, heart pounding. As I stepped closer to the veil, the light grew impossibly bright, not burning, but revealing. And with it came sound. Not music, not thunder or voices. Millions of them, like whispers on wind, echoing through eternity. "What is that?" I asked Jesus. He looked toward the veil. "Prayers." I listened closer. Some were joyful. Others were cracked with sorrow. Some were just fragments. The name of a loved one spoken through gritted teeth, a plea in the dark, a child's whispered, "Help!" "They rise," Jesus said. "Even the ones spoken in silence. Even the ones laced with doubt." I watched as each voice, each word, became a thread of gold, weaving into that same tapestry I saw before, stretching over the earth like a net of mercy. "But why show me this now?" I asked. He turned to me, eyes like fire, but kind. "Because you forgot that your own voice mattered." And suddenly, I remembered how I used to pray when I was a boy. Not fancy prayers, just real ones. Honest. I remembered my mom praying over my bed. I remembered kneeling in the station locker room once, after losing a crew member in a flashover. I remembered the last time I prayed, not words, just a quiet, desperate ache. "You thought I didn't hear," he said. "But I did." Then the veil began to move again. This time, I didn't feel worthy to step through. "I failed so much," I said. "I didn't lead my family in faith. I didn't speak about you. I doubted." Jesus placed his hand on my chest. And every failure, every secret shame, it burned away like fog under morning sun. "You are not returning because you are perfect," he said. "You are returning because you're willing." And with those words, the silence broke. Not with noise, but with purpose. The veil fully opened, and I saw what waited on the other side. When the veil opened, I didn't see clouds or golden gates. I saw faces. Real people. Living people. All over the world. A woman in Iran, kneeling beside her dying father, whispering a name she hadn't spoken since childhood. Jesus. A teenager in Detroit, standing on the edge of a bridge, tears streaming down his face, holding a phone in one hand and a Bible app in the other. A man in a prison cell in Venezuela, head bowed, hands shaking, whispering, "God, if you're real." I didn't know them, but somehow I knew them. I felt their stories in my soul like distant thunder. Every one of them was standing at a threshold, like I was. "Why are you showing me them?" I asked. "Because they are the reason you go back," Jesus replied. I stood in silence. He wasn't showing me the dead. He was showing me the ones still deciding. "They are waiting for a voice," he said. "Not of a preacher, not of a celebrity, just someone who has seen." He looked at me with that same burning compassion. "You will be that voice." "But what if I say it wrong? What if no one listens?" "Then say it anyway," he answered. "The truth does not require applause to be true." I nodded, but I still felt small. I watched the images shift. Now thousands of people gathered in churches, homes, alleys, shelters, fields. Some singing, some weeping, some completely silent. "They're seeking me," he said, "but many have been misled." I saw pastors who turned pulpits into platforms. I saw children taught about rules, but not love. I saw people turned away for who they were, what they wore, who they voted for. "This isn't my church," he said, his voice filled with grief. Then I saw something else. It was me, standing behind a pulpit in a tiny firehouse chapel. Not preaching, just sharing. No suit, no Bible in my hand. just my story, and people were listening. Not because I was wise, but because I was honest. "I'll do it," I said, the words rising from somewhere deeper than thought. "Even if it's just one." Jesus smiled. "Even one is enough to light a nation." And then the world changed again. The mountain disappeared. The sky folded in. The field of light faded. We stood now in darkness, not evil darkness, just still. I could feel the pull of the return. I looked at him one last time. "Will I see you again?" I asked. He didn't answer with words. He just touched my chest, right where the fire had torn me open. And in that instant, I felt something explode inside me. Not pain, breath, there was no tunnel. No flashing rewind of my life. Only a rush, like falling into my own skin. Like breath being poured into lungs that hadn't drawn air in hours. I felt heat. Pain. Screaming. Not mine, someone else's. "Reese! He's back! He's back!" Voices, panicked, overwhelmed. The unmistakable sound of rotors above, medics, radios, static. But all of it was distant, muffled, like sound underwater. What I felt most clearly was the fire. Not outside, inside. It wasn't searing like the blaze that had taken me. It was a clean burn. A furnace of truth. Like a refining flame inside my chest, clearing out the ash and lies I carried all my life. The moment my eyes fluttered open, I wasn't surprised. I didn't ask where I was, I didn't panic. I remembered everything. Every word, every vision, every face, every prayer. Even his hand, still lingering on my spirit like a seal pressed into wax. And I knew the mission hadn't ended in that wildfire. It had just begun. I wasn't unconscious for long. My crew had pulled me from the wreckage just moments after the fire overran our position. My heart had stopped. The paramedic working on me later said he felt heat radiating from my chest even though the flames hadn't touched my gear. "Your skin was glowing," he told me in a whisper. "Not burned. Glowing." I couldn't explain it then, I can now. But I won't drag this out. You didn't come here to hear about hospital rooms, or therapy, or interviews, or news stories. You came for the truth, and this is it. I died. I stood before Jesus. And he sent me back with a message. Not a new religion, not a conspiracy, not a political side. Just this. Pray. Not as a formality, not because it's Sunday, not to check a box. Pray like the world depends on it, because it does. Speak to him like he's listening, because he is. Turn off the noise, shut out the fear. Put down the phone. And pray. You don't need perfect words. You don't need a degree in theology. You just need to mean it. One real prayer can break through darkness no missile or law or movement ever will. You want to change the world? Start in your living room. Start in your truck. Start in the ashes of your worst mistake. Just start, because he's waiting. And the clock is running out. The first time I entered a burning structure, I was 22. Rookie on the crew, full of adrenaline, lungs bursting from the weight of the gear. I remember stepping over a melted toy truck in a child's bedroom, and something inside me shattered. Not because of the fire, because I realized what couldn't be saved. Since that day, I've run toward danger hundreds of times. And every time I've seen it, the line between what burns and what doesn't. Photos turn to ash. Money curls into black flakes. Trophies, jewelry, plans, degrees, they all vanish in heat. But not love, not memory, not faith. Even in the rubble, those things linger. I didn't understand it fully back then, but I do now. Because I've stood in eternity, and I've seen what survives the fire. Jesus didn't show me cathedrals or empires or emblems. He showed me hands reaching for each other. mothers praying for sons, broken men whispering, "I'm sorry," strangers feeding strangers in the middle of war zones, kids holding their dying grandparents' hands and reading them scripture in cracked voices. Those things last. Those things echo beyond death. And I saw something else. The things we hide. Shame we never confess, rage we bury, bitterness we nurse like a pet. All of it weighs the soul down, like wet gear in a drowning river. And we think we're carrying it well, until fire comes, and it all shows. When I stood before Jesus, I thought he'd confront me with my worst days. Instead, he healed them. Not by ignoring the truth, but by looking me in the eye and still calling me by name. That broke me in a way the blaze never could. Because all my life, I thought being good meant hiding the bad. But he didn't want my performance. He wanted my heart. And that's what I want you to hear today. You're not too far. You're not too broken. You're not too late. If you're still breathing, he's still calling. But that window doesn't stay open forever. There will be more fires, more shaking, more loss. But what matters is what can't be shaken. Faith, love, truth, mercy, repentance. Those aren't religious words. They're eternal anchors. And if you don't have them, nothing else will hold when the heat rises. I'm not preaching. I'm testifying because I was dead and now I'm not. I wish I could tell you this story ends with fireworks, that I came back with glowing skin or wings or a prophetic scroll. But it doesn't. It ends with choice, yours. Because here's what I've come to understand. Every one of us will walk through fire. Maybe not literal flames, but something that strips us down, exposes what we trust, what we love, what we serve. For me, it happened at 3:42 p.m. on a ridge in Northern California. For you, maybe it's coming, or maybe it's already begun. Jesus showed me what fire can't touch. Not fear, not pride, not pain, but love. Love walks through untouched. Prayer? It weaves through the flames like golden thread. Truth? It stands like stone. And mercy? Real, heaven-born mercy? It reaches farther than death. That's the point. Not that I died, but that even in death, he was there. Even in fire, he was speaking. And even in silence, he was listening. You may not believe any of this, that's okay. I wouldn't have either, until I stood in the presence of a man whose eyes burned like stars and said my name like it meant something. But if you feel the tug, if you feel the whisper, answer it. Don't wait for the flames, choose now. I gasped. Air tore into my lungs like wine through a broken window. My back arched. Hands gripped my shoulders. Voices shouted, "He's back! Pulse is strong. We've got him." I blinked through smoke and sunlight. The world slammed into focus, charred earth, crying, coughing, the steady beat of helicopter rotors above. I was alive. 14 minutes gone. 14 minutes dead, and yet I'd never felt more alive. No recovery montage. No press conference. No hospital drama. Just this. I died, I saw Jesus. And he sent me back. Not for fame, not for proof. Just to say one thing. Return to him. That's it, not to religion. To him, pray, repent, forgive, love. Because when everything else burns, he's the only thing that lasts.